Hi, everyone. Welcome to the May 2021 Family and Community Webinar. From all of us at Rakhma, we want to say welcome. If you are new to these webinars, Rakhma is a small nonprofit with 4 homes located across the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. Our mission is key and central to everything that we do. And our mission states, Rakhma champions the dignity in the care of individuals living with memory loss in a familiar home environment. So at each one of our 4 locations, we provide person-centered care to folks living with dementia. This webinar series is for family, for friends, and any interested community members. And it's designed to present you with information and opportunities to connect with others who love those living with memory loss and dementia. Everything we cover in this webinar is not to take the place of professional medical advice. Please always double check with a medical professional before implementing any new strategies with your loved one, just to make sure it's the right strategy for them. This content is supposed to serve as a set of guidelines, some practices to try, and should be supplemental in nature to caring for your loved one. So with all that out of the way, this month's topic is reminiscing to support loved ones. So today during the webinar, we're going to be discussing a couple of things. So first, we're going to discuss the differences between remembering and reminiscing. Then we're going to review the research on reminiscing. We'll move to looking at general tips as well as specific ideas for you to try out. We're going to talk about something called validation therapy as a strategy to help your loved one move through painful memory, because sometimes reminiscing brings up painful memories. And then finally, we're going to discuss the benefits to you and your loved one while using reminiscing as an opportunity to support and connect. So with that, let's get going. So a couple of logistics and information about me as the trainer. We ask that everyone mute their lines. You can do so whether a web control or phone. If you've called in, please hit *6 to mute and unmute. We ask that you stay on mute until the question and answer portion. You can also chat in questions. So the chat feature is on the toolbar there on your web controls. If you've called in, I don't think you can chat in. So please just keep your question till the end. This webinar is recorded. So all the content is being recorded and it will be sent out afterward, as well as any additional resources to provide on the topic. Your video is always optional, but I just want to remind you that you are being recorded if you choose to use your video. And as that last reminder, please use chat for questions. So a little bit about me. My name is John Anna Gans. I am Rakhma's training manager. I joined the Rakhma team in December of 2019. So you can get a hold of me at jgans@rakhma.org or 612-564-3118. All right, so let's just keep cruising. I want to really dig into this information and really distinguish the differences between remembering and reminiscing, because they're worlds apart, even though they sound very similar. And in our cultural conversation, they're often used in really similar ways. So I want to help you remember the difference between remembering and reminiscing with some images. So when we're talking about remembering, I want you to think of this really neatly organized home library. Okay, it's color coordinated, it's like size coordinated. If you look at this library, it's so neatly and well taken care of. When we ask someone to remember something, we're asking them to assess and access their memories and look very closely for a very specific piece of information. It's like going into this library that's highly organized and searching for a really specific chapter in a book is how I want you to think about it. So imagine if I ask you, what was the last name of your second grade teacher? That's asking you to remember. You have to scan through all of that information, that organized information in your mind, pull out the book that's the chapter on your teachers or second grade, flip through and find that name. Okay, so if you recall from previous trainings and webinar, dementia not only makes new short term remembering nearly impossible because the short term memory can't convert, it also takes away our brain's systems for memory maintenance. It also strips out memories over time. So, asking your loved one living with dementia to remember something is insensitive at best and cruel at its worst because they can't remember as a direct result of living with dementia. Asking your loved one to remember something often increases feelings of distress, frustration, or sadness. Asking someone to remember something when they live with dementia is usually a recipe for a strained relationship with a person who lives with dementia. So, we don't ever want to ask people to remember things. And again, think of it as that real specific, highly organized process. So, what do we want instead? We want them to reminisce with us. And I want you to think of it like an antique shop. Okay. I don't know if you've all ever been antiquing. It's something that I have done from time to time and enjoy. I don't do it a whole lot, but I really do enjoy it. And if you walk into any antique shop, they're all organized wildly differently. None of this stuff makes sense fully to the person outside. It might be kind of loosely organized into areas or categories, but usually it's just kind of depending on who's organizing the information. Reminiscing is like going into an antique shop. It's about creating the conditions for someone to explore their memories on their terms and only as those memories come back to them. So, to draw that comparison to the antique store, it's like walking through the antique store, touching stuff as you go along, picking it up, looking at it. And maybe in an antique store, you'll find one or two items that really spark for you that you weren't looking for, you didn't plan to find, but as you held it, you thought, gosh, this is what I was looking for. This is what I need. That's what happens when we ask someone to reminisce. We're letting them work through whatever memories they have and see what draws them, what they can recall. So there's lots of potential when we're reminiscing, but only a few things will spark a response. Reminiscing focuses on providing points of stimulation for your loved one. So specific moments and things that you're doing to try to get them to, see what sparks for them. You might offer familiar objects or use other senses to help them access those memories that they can surface. And day to day, the memories might change. Just like an antique shop, the inventory might be always changing. Whatever they can surface is what we're looking for. So it really is providing that open space to explore memories and experiences with just a little guidance and a little support. Reminiscing should never require remembering specific and intentional details. Reminiscing is a powerful tool to connect with loved ones living with dementia, to be able to hear the life stories they can recall, to learn new parts of their personality that you maybe didn't know about, and to enjoy time spent together in a low frustration or ideally frustration free way. In the end, reminiscing helps you and your loved one connect better. So let's talk about some of the background on the research in dementia and reminiscence therapy. And I'm going to be honest with you, when I started digging into this, I expected to find a lot of really clear cut and easy to understand research. But what I found instead is that the jury is still out on whether reminiscence therapy is truly effective for every person and if it can be done in the exact same way, because reminiscing is such a highly personal experience. So, what the body of research tells us is that there are limited benefits established through the scientific process and a lot of variation across the literature. So, it might make a really big difference for the individual who's receiving the reminiscence therapy, but it's actually really hard to replicate that for every person in the exact same way. So, it's kind of hit or miss, is what we're finding out. However, they have found some themes that are consistent across a lot of people, but not everybody. So let's look at what the themes were in some of the research. So, first and foremost, what we find with reminiscence therapy is a decrease in symptoms of depression specifically. So, for this group of that participated in the research, depression was significantly reduced within the reminiscence group compared to the control group. So they had one group doing reminiscence and another group doing something else. The control group didn't have a decrease in depression symptoms. So, for folks who were engaged in the reminiscence therapy, we saw an increased quality of life and decreased depression and other mental health symptoms. And what that means is the conclusion this is the conclusion they found. Reminiscence therapy has a moderate effect on depression and can be broadly used to decrease depression as an alternative to antipsychotics, which have harmful side effects and a really high cost. Of course, we should never decide that we're going to replace somebody's medication or stop giving them the resources that they need to manage their mental health. But it can be a helpful extra thing to do with your loved one. So, next, we're talking about individual reminiscence therapy versus group reminiscence therapy. And there are different benefits for each group. So, this research found that reminiscence therapy has the potential to improve psychosocial outcomes. So, our brain process as well as how we connect to others around us. So, psychosocial outcomes for people living with dementia. The effects are small and are inconsistent across person. So, again, back to that kind of message of we can't just take it and make it work for everybody. It's just so finely tuned to that person. And there were some variations across intervention modality and setting within this research. The individual approaches were associated with improved cognition and mood. So, one to one reminiscence therapy, which is what we're going to spend our time talking about today. But group approaches, so when it was a large group engaged in reminiscence therapy, this research found that there were links to improved communication skills. So the impact on quality of life appeared most promising in shared home care settings. So settings just like Rakhma. So next, we find that there is some cognitive and quality life score increases. But in order to be able to get to that, this research found that reminiscence therapy has to be really routine and very regular. So they did what they described as a mini mental test regarding cognitive skills. They checked for depression symptoms and they checked the quality of life mean scores within the intervention group or the people who received reminiscence therapy. And what they found was that within the group, there was statistically significant changes in all of these scores. So, in the group that received reminiscence therapy, they found a significant difference between elderly individuals in the many mental tests. So, they had higher cognitive scores. They saw a decrease in depression and that increase in quality of life. The results suggest that regular reminiscence therapy should be considered for inclusion as a routine care for a person living with dementia to improve cognitive function, decrease depressive symptoms, and increase overall quality of life scores. So, last, this is research that is looking into newer types of reminiscence therapy that is focused on digital reminiscence therapy and resources. So, reminiscence therapy in this study can improve various dimensions in people who are living with dementia. It may not be, they found it may not be a effective intervention though, because digital reminiscence therapy can be really expensive very quickly. However, digital reminiscence therapy allows multiple users to participate in therapy simultaneously. And digital reminiscence therapy offers a high level of convenience for uploading personal materials and presenting individual triggers for personal memory. This pilot study aimed to evaluate the efficacy of digital reminiscence therapy in comparison to the more conventional reminiscence therapy that all the other research was looking at. And they were looking to develop a strategy for designing larger reminiscence therapy process with that digital reminiscence therapy. So it was a more innovative approach to managing someone living with dementia to help them surface those memories. And they really suggest that more research look into this because what they found initially was people living with dementia, when they engaged in digital reminiscence therapy, had a better mood and more opportunities to engage in social interactions, which is a key component to keeping our loved ones healthy and safe. So that's a quick overview on the research out there. Again, it's really important to understand that it really is about the individual. So let's talk about how you can create those individual moments of connection and give your loved one the most benefit as possible. Let's start by just talking about some general tips for reminiscing with your loved one before we jump into specific ideas for you to try. So, first, as a whole, we really want to focus our time and attention on bringing out the best memories, experiences, or stories that a person has to offer. If you are aware of particularly happy times for your loved one or positive people from their past, thinking about their entire history, not just the amount of time you knew them, but their whole life, those are the things that we want to start bringing forward. It can even focus, you can even focus your time and effort on talking about or bringing things back to them that brought them joy from different periods of their life. So, really, the important message here is whenever we're engaging in reminiscence therapy, we want to be really cautious and thoughtful about what memories we're trying to trigger for somebody. And we really want to focus on those positive memories and happy times, as well as positive people or happy people in their life. So from there, so you've already thought about it, you're kind of like considering it, and you think, I know exactly the times that I'm going to call up for them. I have an idea. We also want to be able to choose a specific topic area for focus, kind of one at a time to help figure out what sparks for a person. We can't just throw everything at them and hope that it works. We want to get really clear and try different topic areas to help kind of navigate and be able to take notes on things. So, you're going to help direct and limit your loved one by choosing a specific area that is relevant and positive for them. So, this might include prompting memories specifically about their work or their jobs that they held, especially when they loved those jobs. So let's say you had someone who was a newspaper editor and they loved it. It was their fate. It just was the best. They loved it. It was an amazing career. That's something that you're going to want to call up for them. Or anyone who worked with them in their career. Maybe they had a business partner that they just adored working with, or maybe they had a coworker that they worked with for 40 years in the same cubicle. Things like that, or same job, right? Same being on the job together. Anybody like that that they really love and enjoy, those are things we want to pull back when we're thinking about our topic area. There might also be really specific parts of a home life. And I'm thinking in particular cultural aspects of home life. So things that they did regularly or things that were key components of the home, any kind of tasks that they really spent a lot of time around. So, bread making, sewing, any kind of traditions that they had within the home, especially if it relates to holidays. So, any kind of holiday that was important to them, those are the kinds of things we want to pull back for them. The hobbies can be things like stamp collecting, sports, cars, um, you know, uh, any kind of activism or advocacy that was really important to someone that they really hold as special to their heart, those are the kinds of things we want to pull forward. It's going to be really helpful to do more things with less talking involved. So, really focusing in on being able to connect outside of language. Because if you recall from previous webinars that we've done, a person living with dementia in the early stages of living with dementia will miss every 1 out of 4 words you speak. So, they're going to miss 25% of what you say. At the middle stages, they're going to miss approximately 2 out of 4 words or 50% of everything you say. And by the end stages, we're looking at they're missing 75% or more of your words as a direct result of the dementia. They lose language processing skills. So when we're thinking about how do we connect through reminiscence, we really want to focus on less words whenever possible. So it can be really helpful to invite your loved one to show you a particular skill that relates to a positive or routine part of their past. So I'll just give a quick example to just give you like what that means. So asking someone who'd been a nurse for most of their life to show you how they used to take blood pressure is a great thing. If they loved being a nurse, that's a great way to be like, "Can I'm not sure. Can you show me how?" And then see what sparks for them. They might be taking your blood pressure and then start talking about, all the time that they had working with patients or a particular patient or a particular moment in their life as a nurse, or other things like asking parents how they burped their babies, right? And give them a doll. So we want to be really careful that we're not giving people a doll to treat them like children. We want to give them a doll as a stand-in for a child because a lot of folks are parents and that's a key component of who they are and they like being parents. So we want to bring that back for them. When a person living with dementia is struggling to use words or recall specifics, maybe they start to get lost in their own reminiscing, like they can't quite grasp what it is that's coming back for them. It might be easier to switch from speaking in words to actually doing actions to share something from their past. So, one of the examples that I give and think about with this, particularly with my grandfather, and I know I've talked about him on other webinars before. There was a moment where my grandfather was really struggling, and as part of a class project, I was supposed to write a letter and ask him about Christmas. So we celebrated Christmas. Supposed to ask him about Christmas uh, from when he was growing up. And what ended up happening was he wrote me a very sweet letter. It wasn't always like fully connected, but what he did was he gave me an orange with cloves studded in it because that was a key present that he would have gotten as a kid. So he shared this really important present that he got as a child that was so important. This clove studded orange was like such a big deal. Having him make that and give that to me as part of the letter was like such an important part of my life. And I didn't understand that that was reminiscence therapy, when I was that young. Like I was just, completing a sixth or seventh grade class project. But it was such an important moment for him to be able to share. So then I could bring up the oranges later. So those are the kinds of things that more doing, less talking. If he were still here today, that's something I absolutely would do with him because he talked about how excited he was to get that gift. I would sit with him and stud an orange with cloves and ask him to show me how to do it. So, pardon me, you can also invite others to join in. So, reminiscence therapy, as long as you help them understand we're not asking people to remember, we're just creating conditions for things to come back to them. Involving family members or other beloved people in their life can be really helpful. Okay. So you might want to include others, especially if your loved one is living in an assisted living facility, to be able to stimulate those personal connections. So, really thinking about a lot of family members will talk about or loved ones will talk about, I don't know how to talk to that person anymore. They were such an important part of my life, but I don't know how to communicate. Show people how to reminisce with your loved one to be able to create those personal connections, even as your loved one's skills and abilities are changing. You can also actually involve others in the assisted living facility in the reminiscence process. So, moving from individual to group to be able to create those personal connections with other residents. Because no matter what happens, when we help someone find a moment of joy, even if they aren't our loved one, but just someone who lives in the same facility as our loved one, that will have a lasting impact on them regardless. Their mood is going to elevate, they're going to be more connected, and that gives your loved one more opportunities to be in community with others. So go ahead, invite other people to join in on the reminiscing. And the last general tip that I would give in particular for reminiscence therapy is if your loved one is struggling to start reminiscing, or maybe, you see that look on their face and they just, nothing is coming, it can be really helpful for you to start sharing your memories first. So you might be sharing memories of a particular vacation or activity. You might be sharing specific memories with your loved one. Um, You can also ask for help. So start talking about things that you really enjoy that you know they're going to know, and then ask for help from them. That is a key strategy to be able to share with someone. So, to give you an example to make it a little bit more concrete, um, you can do something like, oh, gosh darn it, I can't remember how to tie this. Can you help me? That might prompt reminiscing, that might prompt them to bring up memories that they otherwise wouldn't have, and for you to be able to connect. So, even simple things that you know how to do, it's okay to fake it in this regard. Maybe you know that they were a really great home chef, or they loved making food for the family on Sunday dinners, or whatever it might be. You might start doing something in the kitchen and be like, gosh, I really don't remember how to make these chocolate chip cookies that you used to make all the time. Can you help me with that? That's a great way, and if they can't help you right away, you can maybe hand them a spoon and be like, "Hey, can you help stir this?" You're just getting them to be active, and you're really engaging by starting with sharing or asking for help. Okay, so now that we've kind of given some tips, and specific opportunities and guidelines to help you, let's talk about really specific ideas that you can use with your loved one to help them prompt that reminiscing. And again, so important, we're not asking for remembering, we're asking for reminiscing. So here are some ideas for you to try with your loved one. Go for taste and sense. They are some of our most powerful memories are stored around these senses. So our brains store really critical and emotional memories when it's connected to scent and taste. So there are so many different smells and tastes that will bring memories back for someone and from a whole range of their life. So I'll give you a couple personal examples of what you should be thinking of. So the smell of lilacs blooming is my absolute favorite smell on the planet. And it brings me so many happy memories of being outside in the springtime. There's also something like the taste of apple with peanut butter. So that's a huge one for me. It's such a deep sense memory. So when I eat apples with peanut butter, it brings me so many memories of working on my dissertation because that was one of my favorite snacks at that point in my life. It's still one of my top favorites, but maybe not the top anymore. But those are just really quick examples of the kind of things that I'm talking about. Find scents and tastes that will bring out different periods of life for your loved one to be able to explore and see what comes back for them. This is going to be particularly critical for folks from diverse cultural backgrounds, especially if they're living in an assisted living facility or some kind of day program, things like that. They might not get the culturally specific foods that they grew up eating within those day programs or assisted living facilities. So, having the scent or the taste of foods that are really specific to their cultural background can maybe bring parts of them back and bring those the reminiscing really to the front for them. Additionally, music and sound. So again, you're going to see it's really connected to our senses because reminiscence therapy is all about engaging the senses in a meaningful way. So sound is all around us all of the time. So whether it's the sound of crickets in the late evening that bring back memories for your loved one, the ocean rolling up on the beach, or the sound of really intense traffic, right? Depending on where they lived and where they worked, our whole lives have a series of soundscapes that bring back memories for us to that specific period in our life of where we were and what we were doing. So, this might include things like specific languages or dialects. Just hearing familiar words spoken in a first or a second language can bring back really happy childhood memories. And of course, with reminiscence therapy and working with someone who lives with dementia, we want to aim for much older memories than newer memories because in dementia, they lose the most recent memories first. So dig back. Be able to find, maybe you're not quite sure, but you do some digging in your family tree and you find out that someone had this really specific dialect that they grew up speaking. Find, for example, the sounds on YouTube of people speaking within that dialect to be able to prompt that for them. Maybe it's not a sound so much like spoken word, but maybe it's music. So, particular music or maybe a theme song from a favorite television show when they were younger or at a different period in their life, using those kinds of sounds can be really helpful because music at the end of the day is just a very specific type of sound. So, find out which sounds or music really light up your loved one and help them deeply connect, even if it doesn't involve talking. Remember, loving someone living with dementia, they're going to lose those language skills over time. So you won't always see them light up and have hear a whole story. Sometimes what we're looking for is just their whole face lights up. You see that they get active in a way that they haven't been active, even if they don't have skills anymore that they used to have. That's important to look for. So, for loved ones who have limited or lost their verbal communication skills as a result of the dementia, you can always hum or sing together with the music. And we did a whole family and community webinar on how to use music to connect in January. You can access that on our website at Rakhma. So, if you really want to learn more about music specifically, you can find it there. When you're working to reminisce with your loved one, you're going to want to use really specific trigger objects. So it can prompt really good reminiscing. When we're talking about a trigger object, we're talking about something that is happy, connected to those positive memories, like we already talked about. And it's really going to bring back some part of their hobbies or their core, kind of the core pieces of their personality. So, absolutely, we just had a chat in muscle memory, 100%. So think of things that you know about this person. Maybe they were really avid knitters, like they just knit like there was no tomorrow. Bring them a set of knitting needles or a ball of yarn. Maybe it's woodworking materials. Maybe they really loved working with wood. Or maybe it's things like they were a beautician and they love to paint people's nails in their free time, right? Bring them a bottle of nail polish. Anything like that, hats from old hat collections, any kind of object that would be really familiar, really important, and connected to happy periods within their life. The other thing that you really want to think about with trigger objects is maybe it's a really specific item from their cultural or religious backgrounds and traditions, as long as those are happy memories for them, right? Because not everyone has super happy memories connected to cultural or religious traditions. But if it is a happy thing for your loved one, bring those things forward. Bring things like the rituals that they were a part of or important aspects, religious traditions. Bring those trigger objects for them and see what sparks for them. So, really, at the end of the day, what I'm saying here is that trigger objects are anything that they would have spent a significant amount of time and energy thinking about, doing, or being connected to. Okay, so this is one of the easy ones. It's photographs or movies. So remember, we're thinking much, much older photographs. We're not thinking recent or contemporary photographs because that's going to be really confusing for your loved one. So any old photographs or movies, whether they're home movies or just movies that the person really liked, we want to engage their vision. Okay. This is a really great set of trigger objects to be able to prompt that reminiscing about happier times. If you don't have old photos for whatever reason, because sometimes we just don't have them, you can always use things like their favorite movies or TV shows. Anything, any kind of visual media. Maybe it's a magazine they particularly loved, right? Like I once had a connection with an older person who he kept every copy of National Geographic he had ever gotten. So bringing him a copy of National Geographic if he lived with dementia would be an extraordinary way to kind of prompt that for him. So using visuals can really help bring back old memories back to that surface. And remember, we're looking for that positive emotional response, not necessarily a long conversation about it. So the last thing here is to really think about technology. So I know we talked about the research on digital reminiscence therapy, but get creative. You don't have to have a personalized iPad with a specific program downloaded, right? You don't have to do all that. What you can do is a whole bunch of other creative stuff. So let's say you don't have photographs from that person's childhood. Use Google Street View to take your loved one through a virtual tour of an old town. the home that they used to live in, right? Google Street View has a weird amount of data, and it can really actually help that person. Have them walk you through the places that they used to stop. Even if they look different on Google Street View, you can say, well, what did it used to look like? Those are things that you can say, hey, bring that memory back. And of course, if they can't right, if they can't reminisce with you about what it used to look like, just shift opportunities, change kind of the direction, be like, huh, I think I remember blah, 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 blah. Get that start by sharing, ask for help. There's a lot of other opportunities with technology, like accessing the archives of your local historical society. Most counties have a historical society of some kind. So that's an opportunity to be able to use. And many museums and historical societies have put their collections available online due to the pandemic. That includes science, art, history, all of those things that maybe they really loved, that they took their kids to, that they took you to, or that you went on a date together, whatever it might have been. So many of those collections are available online as a result of changes. There's also things like do window shopping online with your loved one for favorite items or activities that they really loved. So you don't have to purchase it. You're just you're a different kind of window shopping, right? Technological windows. So all of those are examples of ways that you can connect. So maybe you can search, right, 1970s popular clothing and look at pictures together and be like, huh, I think you would look great in that. Ooh, do you think this would work for me? As a way to build that reminiscing point. So, all of these tools are opportunities, and you can really call up different periods of their life. The internet is actually very helpful for reminiscence therapy. We're really only limited by our creativity when it comes to supporting reminiscing with our loved ones. So, always want to make space. Are there any kind of other ideas or questions so far? So I see Marcia's chatted in. What kinds of questions are okay to ask related to the memories that they share? So we're going to really focus on very general memory questions. So we're not going to, if they say, oh my gosh, I remember eating ice cream in that parlor, we don't want to ask, well, how much did the ice cream cost? That would be a remembering rather than a reminiscing question. So we want to ask much more general questions. So just going with the ice cream parlor situation, you might say something like, oh, I love a root beer float. What kind of ice cream do you like? And that way, see if it triggers for them, see if something comes up for them. It's a really open ended, it's about their personal preferences, but it's not asking them to remember a specific detail of what they used to do there or who they used to visit there. You're just creating that space to see what comes up. Or you might say something like, oh, it sounds like that ice cream parlor was really fun. Where else did you used to go as a kid? That is a wide open question. They could take it anywhere. And if any of those reminiscence, like that reminiscent thought comes up for them, you can explore it with them. You just want to be really careful to not ask really detailed or specific recall based questions. So that was a good question. Thank you so much. I'll just pause again if anyone wants to chat in any other ideas. We have a small group today, and that's okay. But I always want to make space. Other ideas for how you would want to reminisce with someone. And if you want to chat in, go for it. I'll keep moving us along and I'll go back just in case. Okay. Sounds like focus on senses. Yes, absolutely. Sensory information is some of the strongest memory that people will keep when they live with dementia. So they're going to lose a lot of skills, they're going to lose a lot of recall abilities, but that's those senses, man. Our memory, our emotions are so deeply tied to our senses. And in particular, for someone who lives with dementia, we're going to really want to focus in on visual and tactile cues and senses. So stuff they can touch, right? Smell is going to be really strong. We want to be really careful around hearing because of the loss of word processing skills. Um, Eventually, over time, in most of the diagnoses, they won't have any word processing and language understanding skills after a while. So really focusing on those tactile, that's a great question. All right. I will keep on trucking, y'all. Okay. So I do want to address, because this is a question I get asked from time to time, what do I do if something really sad comes up for them, or something really angering or difficult? Or, for some folks, especially in dementia, because they're going to be moving along the timeline of their life, you might show up to hang out with them, engage in some reminiscence, and all of a sudden you find out you're in a conversation about the day that they filed for divorce and their spouse actually died of a heart attack, right? Like things like that happen. There's so many right? Like so many possibilities of difficult memories that come up for people. The most important thing to do is not to try to avoid it. Okay. So it's going to be really hard as a loved one, especially if you were a child or a friend, or maybe even as a spouse, right? That difficult memory, we might want to shy away from it because we don't want to talk about it with them, because we don't want them to be upset. Here's the deal. They're already upset. They're already stuck in this moment. They need your help to move forward. Eventually, the dementia will make it so they don't remember this, in an hour or two, but they're going to be stuck and in a lot of pain if we don't take action. So, we want to do something called validation therapy. So, this is created specifically by, or really developed by, a woman named Naomi Feel. And it is particularly designed to help older people with cognitive impairments as well as dementia. So, what is it? Let's talk about it. So, it really is that strategy for helping somebody move through it. And the basic idea behind validation therapy is that people who are in the later stages of their life are going to have unresolved issues that drive their behavior and emotions. But honestly, who among us does not have unresolved issues that drive our, behaviors and emotions from time to time at any point in our life stage? But in particular, for older generations, they may not have had opportunities to talk about those things because it wasn't allowed in the family, it wasn't allowed culturally, right? So there might be some really serious unresolved stuff that comes up for them. So what we're doing in validation therapy is more than just simply validating and saying, yes, it's okay to feel that way, although that is a component of it. What we're doing is focusing on helping that person work through and process the emotions that are behind their behaviors and reactions. Okay. So, and especially with a person living with dementia, if that sad memory comes up, they're not going to be able to necessarily look at you and say, I'm thinking about the time I was 40 years old and this thing happened when I tried to divorce my ex husband, right? Like they won't have those skills. So maybe their energy changes really differently, or they start to get really quiet and like come down, right? You're going to be able to see what's happening for your loved one on some level. They might be able to talk to you about what's happening, but for the most part, it's probably going to be a lot of behavioral and emotional changes that you're looking at. So, what we have to do is really focus in on how are these emotions communicating, excuse me, how are these behaviors communicating their emotions, especially because they're living with memory loss, confusion, disorientation to the timeline, as well as other symptoms of dementia. The other piece I just want to plug, we did the trauma informed care for folks living with dementia as our family and community webinar in March. So you can go ahead and access that too. Um, but the most important thing here, when we're talking about the difficult conversation, when we're helping people process, um, we really want to focus in on understanding that our behaviors as their loved one can either make it worse for them or it can help them resolve it. So if we walk away and try to pretend it's not happening or we try to avoid it, it's going to make it worse for somebody. We can work through them. We can help them process without shame or judgment as an opportunity to truly help. So we just had a question come in. I'm thinking about how to apply these concepts to survivors of domestic violence or sexual violence. Essentially, treat them like you would any other survivor. Yes, absolutely. So, particularly with living with dementia, those memories of domestic or sexual violence are going to come and go. And depending on what's happening in their environment, it might really trigger for them. So, the main thing that we want to do is we're not going to ask them a lot of questions about the details of what has happened. We really just want to focus in on getting them to talk about the feelings that they're experiencing, or maybe some of the thoughts that they're having if they can. A really great approach in validation therapy is actually to have them draw things out for you because they might not have the word or language skill anymore. So what you can do is say, "Hey, let's draw together. Let's draw how you're feeling. Like draw what you're thinking about." That can be really helpful. So, other things in validation therapy. So, these are some specific tools and phrases. I will send out the link to Naomi Field's work in our follow up email after this to make sure that you can read in on this for yourselves, because I think that's so important to not just take my word for it. With validation and exploration, what we're doing is encouraging the full expression of the hard moment and allowing that person to grieve those feelings, whatever their grief might look like, right? It might be being really shut down, it might be crying, it might be yelling, right? As long as they're not threatening themselves or harming others, let them process that feeling, even if it feels scary or uncomfortable for you as maybe a child or a loved one or a friend. After we're kind of moving through that grief process, we want to honor it. We want to engage in empathetic communication with them. And we want to help them if it is appropriate to forgive what has happened, because that can be a key component of validation, is allowing them to forgive it, that they don't have to continue holding on. So we want to be a really active listener and actively invite the conversation. You see the hard memory has come up. It's now your job to be an active listener and actively invite them into the conversation to reminisce and talk about it. So here are some specific tools and phrases you're going to want to use. So we want to use validation based phrases that summarize what we think we're seeing. Okay. And we're going to temperature check, right? Sometimes we might summarize and it's totally off base. They'll let you know through their behaviors, their actions, or their responses. So phrases you might want to use could be things like, "It must be really hard to know that happened." Or, "It sounds like you must really miss that person." "I would feel that way too." So, really basic phrases, really basic empathetic phrases. But when it comes to supporting your loved one living with dementia, sometimes it can be really hard or scary because you don't know what to do, especially if, for example, you're the child of the person living with dementia and they're suddenly talking about that like your father or your parent, right? One of your parents, all of a sudden, it's this new information that you didn't know about the other parent and they're sharing it. So you might want to be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't do this." Remember that they're stuck and they need your help. So you can just say basic phrases like, "That must be really hard." You don't got to engage in whether it's true or not true, because remember, your loved one living with dementia doesn't know the difference between what they think is happening and what's actually happening, because for them, the memories are happening right now sometimes. So, empathetic phrases to start. That's always where we want to start when they're expressing something bad that they've or difficult or sad that they're thinking about. Start with empathy. Next, you can use a strategy called exploring the extremes. So, it allows that opportunity to express difficult emotions that most of us avoid talking about with other people. So, asking something like, "What was the worst part of not being able to make it to the hospital before he died?" It sounds awful to ask somebody about their loved one having a heart attack, but they're stuck in that moment and they don't know that it's not happening right now. Okay. In a lot of cases, they think it's happening right now, or when they're reminiscing, it feels closer than it is because in their mind, they're actually 45 and it happened when they were 39. So they're 6 years out from this death. And that's a lot harder. So ask the extremes of saying, "What's the worst part?" Allow them to talk it through. And if they don't have those language skills, give them things to draw, have them do movement with you. And if your loved one doesn't have a lot of physical coordination and maybe like getting up and moving out of a chair isn't great, you can have them do movement with you. You can listen to a song while they're processing it. There's so many opportunities here. And then the flip side, the extreme, because we got to talk about one extreme, then we can talk about the other. What was the best part of your relationship together? And then just let them talk about whatever comes up. By starting first of addressing the bad stuff that they're talking about, the bad, the hard, the ugly, the sad, the difficult, it allows them to free up that mental capacity and kind of let go of some of those pieces. It's allowing them to grieve, to be able to move on. And then we want to shift it into a redirection technique of, What was the best part? What did you love most about that person? What drew you to them? Asking those broad questions to see what comes up for them can help them move through that grief process, honor the relationship or the experience, and move forward. So once you kind of help them move forward by validating first, kind of exploring with them to give them that space to grieve and honor what has happened, and then that redirection technique of the best part or good things that then moves us right back into the ability to reminisce with them. So exploration questions like, tell me more about how you met that person. Tell me more about what it was like back then. Things like that. You want to be careful with language of time-based language, right? Because for them back then might be like a year ago in their memory, but for you it's 55 years ago, right? So just be careful with like, tell me what that was like. So to really sum up, I think validation therapy, it helps reduce confusion. It helps reduce anger or distress. It changes behaviors that are being used to communicate really difficult emotions over time. The more we allow someone to revisit that and help them move through it, like the better it's going to be. I think Naomi Feil says it best. So this is a direct quote from her. Emotions that are validated with empathy are relieved. And to me, I think that's just such an important, like that's such an important part. So when those sad or difficult memories come up during reminiscing, because they're going to come up, help validate and move them through that with you. Don't walk away from it. Remember, our responses to someone living with dementia will almost always harm or help. It's very rare it does nothing. Okay. So choose helping whenever you can, however it's possible. So let's kind of start wrapping up toward the end here. We're getting close out of time together. Let's talk about the benefits of reminiscing with a loved one. And again, remember from the research, there's a lot of benefits that can't be replicated across large groups, but here's some of the things that you can look for in your relationships. So, first is just a basic sense of connection because honestly, the act of sharing stories, the act of exploring someone's memories, the act of bringing back critical components of their cultural and diverse backgrounds when it's been stripped away for a variety of reasons, those are so powerful for connecting and for really truly meaningfully connecting. So, processing those wonderful memories and allowing our loved one with dementia to work through those memories with us, it fundamentally binds us. So, through intentionally setting the stage to prompt conversations around these memories, we build a stronger relationship with one another. And remember, your loved one living with dementia is not going to remember you had this conversation. That's a guarantee. They won't remember the conversation. What they will always remember is when they see you, they will remember how they felt around you. So that powerful connection, they'll remember feeling loved and connected the next time they see you. Or maybe it's not the very next time, but it's the time after that. That sense memory, that like physicality is just so critical to connection. You're going to see an increased level of understanding. And this is particularly for you and less for your loved one living with dementia. A lot of folks talk about when someone is diagnosed with dementia in their life that they love. They express that they don't know how to talk to their loved one anymore and they don't understand how to continue building a relationship because that person has changed. You're right. The dementia has changed them and they don't have the skills that they used to. And it's a different way to connect and to understand one another. So using strategies of reminiscence offers a much better understanding of just how to be in connection, how to build a powerful relationship with your loved one, even as they're losing their skills and abilities to the disease. And it allows you to really understand what brings them joy, sparks connection between the two of you, or sparks happy and positive experiences across their life course. Seriously, track what sparks for somebody and share that with anybody who's a caretaker for your loved one. Those increased joyful moments are always worth the time and effort. You're going to get a lot of context potentially. Um, I think this is one of the most important and powerful aspects of reminiscing together with your loved one, especially if you have a relationship where you weren't always a part of their life. Um, It really allows you to understand old stories and maybe get new information about those stories. So, uh, this is going to be especially true if your loved one doesn't recognize who you were in their life anymore. So maybe they don't recognize you're their adult child and they think that you're still a 3-year old. You can reminisce with them around who you were as a 3-year-old and find out new things that you never learned before. Or you're going to be able to reminisce with them and find out things about their siblings, like your aunts and uncles, or great aunts and uncles, or your grandma, your great grandma, right? You're going to be able to find context about their whole life that is going to fundamentally change how you understand who you are in that person's life and all the things you know about them. So, while not being recognized is truly a really awful and difficult moment, we can use that to actually connect on a more deep level. And remember, when you find out things in the context that would be really important for a caretaker, share that with your caretaking team. So, share that with your care providers. Things like if you find out in a difficult or sad memory that maybe they experienced abuse at the hands of their mother or father, right? That's important information to share with the care team because they might start having a reaction to a care provider, and the care provider doesn't know that context at all. So, saying something really simple, and remember, we talked about this in the trauma informed webinar in March, saying something simple like, hey, heads up, I found out that my parent was abused by their parent. They might really avoid a masculine person walking into their room to do bed checks. Like that might be really triggering and upsetting for them. Can we make sure that if ever possible, we have a feminine person walking in doing bed checks at night? Things like that are really important context to share. You're going to see psychosocial benefits. So the research isn't always clear about like what kind of benefits and to what degree. Advocates and caregivers routinely describe how positive reminiscing and validation therapy improves their mental health, improves a person with dementia's social connections. And again, remember, they're not going to remember the content of the conversation, but their mood elevation, that increase in depression symptoms, maybe some cognitive increases depending. All those things are going to really have a lasting effect on their days. And it's going to have a lasting effect on the care providers. It's going to have a lasting effect on maybe fellow residents of an assisted living facility. When we're all doing better, we're all doing better. You're going to see some cognitive skills for some folks living with dementia. So they might retain those cognitive skills a little bit better if they regularly engage in reminiscence therapy, especially if you pair the activities of the act of reminiscing with specific activities around hobby objects, trigger objects, previous rituals or routines that they did, right? Whether it's knitting or fixing a sink or a cultural or religious tradition that was a huge part of their life, whatever it is, that might help them retain some cognitive skills for a while. I want to be very clear. There is no stopping dementia's progression. It will continue. It's just not available in our medical science right now. But we can help preserve skills by engaging in that reminiscence whenever possible. And finally, mood. Y'all, let's talk about mood. So many loved ones talk about how it can be really hard to visit their loved one living with dementia. Reminiscing is going to help you change your mood. Okay. So many loved ones describe leaving a visit with their loved one as things like difficult, demoralizing, or frustrating because they didn't know how to communicate. They didn't know how to connect. Their loved one wasn't really present. They didn't know how to help their loved one and they didn't know what to do. Reminiscing is going to change your mood because you're going to find more opportunities for joy and connection together. You're going to get that context. You're going to get that understanding, right? You're going to feel better about your visits and you're going to build your skills in loving and supporting the person who lives with dementia in your life. That has a wildly important impact on how you think and feel about your loved one. And remember, folks with dementia read energy like pros, right? They don't understand the words, but they're reading energy and they're reading emotional response and they know those things still. So if you think and feel about your loved one more positively, they're going to feed off of that energy. And the time we have together is just so precious. So the more you can do to improve your loved one's mood and yours, it allows us to be able to cherish that time more deeply. So let's wrap it up with some key takeaway messages before we invite any last minute questions and then head out for the evening. So, things I want you to remember because you have the skills to be able to remember it. Reminiscing is about creating the conditions for memories and emotions and experiences to come back to a person in a very low stress way, right? Anytime we add pressure or stress, that now becomes about remembering, and remembering is always a bad thing. Remembering is not good for our loved ones living with dementia because it's requiring a specific recall. It's that library analogy we started with. Reminiscing is walking around an antique store and seeing what sparks for them. So make that open space. Remember, we really want to focus wherever we can on surfacing happy times, happy people, happy memories, positive things from their life across the entire life course. We want to focus our time and energy really going backwards in their life. So we want to focus on their younger years all the way through to their childhood. We have to avoid more recent memories. They don't know what has happened because their long term memories no longer have those memories. So focus on positive and happy. Choose 1 to 2 specific strategies to try at a time. So we really want to focus on building your skills in reminiscing as well as building up that relationship to be able to support and check what works for your loved one, what it sparks for them in that antique store style analogy. Really, we want to focus, 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 because then we can provide that information to others who support them. Use validation therapy. It is not an if, it is only a when on those hard or sad or difficult memories and experiences. They're going to surface. So use validation therapy to help your loved one process through those hard moments and to help you process through that hard moment because you might be finding out information about a loved one that you didn't know, and it's going to be really hard. So, validation therapy can help you both move through it. If we try to avoid or minimize those feelings because we're uncomfortable, we're doing harm to our loved one living with dementia. So, whenever you can, use that validation therapy. And then finally, stand back and look at the benefits of reminiscing with your loved ones. It won't work perfectly every time. It might outright fail a few times. Maybe you'll get things that you weren't expecting. But reminiscence always offers a strategy to make those meaningful connections, no matter what stage your loved one is living with in their dementia. And remember, one moment of joy together is always one more moment of joy together. And that's worth a whole bunch. So get out there, start practicing your reminiscence skills and see what happens. All right. That moves us into any final questions or ideas. So, this is the part where you can unmute yourself or you can chat in any final questions before we do the last minute wrap up. And of course, if you're listening to the recording, we'll just give it a minute. It's going to be a minute of silence if folks want to ask questions. So, I'll just pause. Ooh, great question. How do you know they're sharing actual memories? You might not. That's the truth. You might not actually know if they're sharing actual memories. For some particular diagnoses around dementia, it prompts a lot of really intense hallucinations and sleep disturbance disorders that then create more hallucinations. Okay. They might be auditory hallucinations, they might be visual, they might be, there can be scent based hallucination, right? They believe something is happening that's not actually happening. The most important thing with anyone living with dementia, we never argue it ever. They want to tell you it's 1980 and President Reagan is in office and they're so excited about that fact. Super. We don't argue with them because they can't possibly know. They don't have that capability to distinguish between now and then. And sometimes they don't have the ability to distinguish between that actually happened and I saw that in a movie. If you'll recall from other webinars, things like watching the TV, they can't distinguish between what's on the television and what's happening in real life. So if you have a show like CSI or some crime-based show on in the background, if they get tuned into it and start watching too closely, they'll start to believe that a murder has actually happened and they're watching the murder investigation happening right now and they'll get really scared and upset. So we don't argue that. We don't know if it's the actual memory. We go along with it because we want to focus more on how they're feeling and how they're responding and less on whether it's true or not. And sometimes it's going to be true, sometimes it's not. It's not ours to figure out. We're just there to be able to connect. So, even I'm just thinking about some examples of like when I've been at Rakhma and standing with a resident or two in those moments when they start sharing what seems like a real memory, but then it kind of starts devolving into not being very clear, right? Like, who I what are you saying words? You just go with it, follow their energy. So there's one particular resident that I can think of who came up to me and was just so excited to see me and was just the words didn't make any sense. I wasn't clear on what she was saying, but then she kept laughing like she'd told a joke. So I just laughed with her. I had no idea what the joke was, but me laughing to her laughing made her feel really excited. So then she started chatting at me more with nonsense words I didn't understand. So I just followed her emotional cues that whole time. Okay. Just follow those cues every time. So when she paused, like I would go, uh-huh, and then she would keep going. Stuff like that is how we can really process. And it doesn't matter, right? The reality doesn't matter. We're just there to be able to connect and bring those joyful experiences forward. I see a comment. Thank you. This was really helpful. I wish I had this for my grandfather. I have a friend whose mother's going through it. Oh my gosh, yes. We have so many resources. I'll send you the website link that is all of our family and friends resources that you can share. We've gone through a lot. There's I think 7 or 8 of the webinars now that are just for family and friends that are focused on specific tips and strategies on how to have a better relationship with the loved one living with dementia. So I'll make sure to send that out in the follow up. So okay, any last minute these were all really great questions. So I know we have a small group, but we've had a mighty group. Any last minute questions or anything else you want to cover? I know it's a few minutes over, so if you got to run, please run. Otherwise, we'll just wrap it up. Okay. So feel free if you still have a question, throw it down. But thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are listening to the recording after the fact, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to connect with us. Please be sure to connect with Rakhma. So our main line is 612-824-2345. So if you have any questions about Rakhma, you can always get a hold of us. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. That's where we make announcements around our webinars. Additionally, you can just ask to be put on the resource list and we can send it out to you. And I'll send the follow-up survey in our email, in the follow-up email tomorrow or Friday, like always. Please give your ideas and feedback. We want to be able to give you content that you think would be really important. I love picking the content, but I don't have to. So please tell us what you want to see and what's going well and what we can do better. And then last but not least, because I always think it's important to show our resources and our references, here's all the research that we started by talking through at the very beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and stop us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.